At that school, an entire class disappeared, along with their teacher, in the middle of a lesson. It happened on a regular school day in Ohio. The school was located on the outskirts of a small town called Riverwood, an old building built back in the 1950s. Nothing unusual had ever happened there until that morning. At around 10:15 a.m., an English class entered room 214. 20 students and their teacher, Mrs. Harper, a calm woman who had worked at the school for over 10 years. 40 minutes later, the bell rang. The classroom door didn't open. Students from the neighboring classroom didn't think much of it at first. But a few minutes later, the math teacher came to check. He knocked, no response. The door wasn't locked. He opened it, and there was no one inside. The classroom looked like the lesson had just begun. Notebooks were still on the desks. An assignment was written on the board. Some pens were left uncapped. One chair was pushed back, as if someone had just stood up. But there wasn't a single person in the room. The windows were locked from the inside. There were no exits besides the main door. Hallway security cameras showed something strange. No one left the classroom after the lesson started. Not one of the 20 students. Not Mrs. Harper. Police arrived within the hour. The entire building was searched. The attic, the basement, the ventilation system. Everything was checked. No trace of them. Then they started questioning students from nearby classrooms. One girl remembered a strange sound. She was sitting just across the wall from room 214. She described it as a low humming noise, like an old generator running somewhere. Another student said he heard a voice, too quiet to make out the words, but he was sure it wasn't the teacher. Another detail surfaced later. One of the missing students had a phone. It was found under a desk. It had been recording audio during the lesson. The recording lasted just 3 minutes. At first, it sounded like a normal class. Mrs. Harper's voice, pages turning, quiet chatter. Then the humming begins, low, steady, almost unnoticeable. It slowly gets louder. A few seconds later, one of the students says that the room suddenly feels cold. Mrs. Harper tells everyone to stay in their seats. Then there's a sound, like something falling. One of the students starts to panic. And then, something strange happens. A second voice appears on the recording. It doesn't sound like anyone in the room. The voice speaks slowly, clearly. It says one sentence: "Stay where you are. It will be easier." After that, the humming grows louder, much louder. Someone screams. Chairs fall over. And then, silence. Complete, heavy silence. The recording cuts off. When investigators analyzed the audio, they noticed one detail. Right at the very end, there's a sound like footsteps, but not on the floor, as if someone is walking on glass. The investigation lasted for months. Not a single body was ever found. The case was officially closed after a year. Cause of disappearance, unknown. But there's one detail that's rarely mentioned. 3 weeks after the incident, the school janitor was working a night shift. Around midnight, he walked past room 214 and heard that same sound, a quiet hum coming from inside. He stopped, listened, and according to his statement, he heard voices. Children's voices. They were speaking all at once, too quiet to understand. But one voice stood out, calm, clear, the same voice from the recording. The janitor opened the door. The room was empty again. But there was something new on the board. It hadn't been there before. Police documented it in their report. The photo is still stored in the county archives, written on the board with the words, "We are still in class." What would you have done in his place? Would you open the door or just walk away? Subscribe. There are more stories here that even school records try to keep quiet.